Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today. Imagine waking up in a small trailer nestled in the Nevada desert. Outside, ancient limestone cliffs shimmer in the early sun. Inside, philosophy books teeter in towering stacks, besides a chalk bag and climbing shoes resold 5 times over. Without even leaving bed, you reach over and flick on a coffee maker, a ritual honed not just for comfort, but for purpose. This is how Bill Ramsey begins his day. He is not just warming up for another session at Mount Charleston, he is readying himself for war with gravity, with time, and with the internal voice that dares ask, shouldn't you be slowing down? At 65, Bill is a full time philosophy professor and a lifelong climber, still sending 514s, climbing routes so difficult they are typically reserved for elite athletes half his age. Bill started climbing in the 70s before sport climbing had a name. He trained on a treadwall decades before they were cool. And today, he still outtrains, outplans, and outclass climbers across generations, not by defying age, but by redefining its terms. Today, you will hear how intellectual joy and athletic pursuit feed each other, the secrets behind his meticulous 8 hour training days. Yes, 8 hour long training days. Next, why projecting hard roots in your 60s requires a radical mental shift, one built on awe, grit, and reinvention. How his pain box metaphor can help you reframe sacrifice, effort, and joy in pursuit of your goals. Most importantly, you will hear from someone who has refused to let the passage of time dictate the boundaries of identity or passion. Whether you are an aging athlete, a weekend warrior, or someone contemplating what's next in life, Bill's story is a masterclass in resilience, self awareness, and staying in the game long after the spotlight fades. Stick around to the end. Bill might just change how you think about age, effort, and the kind of life worth climbing for.
So I'm actually in my home office. This is where I do a lot of my work when I'm at home. I have an office on school as well, but I'm here in Las Vegas, on the west side of Las Vegas, which is closer to the climbing, of course. And I just got done teaching at UNLV today. I was teaching 2 classes. And so that's where I'm at right now. And then for breakfast, I'm a little bit of an oddity. I tend not to, I like to eat when I'm hungry. And when I get up in the morning, I'm usually not very hungry. So what I actually had for breakfast was a nice strong cup of coffee And then a little bit later in the day, I had some granola and banana, kind of mid morning, late morning, and something like that. What happened? One thing that's kind of funny. When I was I had a trailer for a while that I would live in the summertime when I was at places like Rifle, and the bed was right next to the stove. And what I would do is I would sort of set up my kind of espresso coffee maker right there on the stove. So in the morning when I'd wake up, all I had to do is just roll over and turn on the stove, and I would get this nice hot cup of coffee without getting out of bed. So then when I got so then when I got home, I'm like, wow, that was actually really a nice little thing in life. So now at my house, in my bedroom, right next to my bed, I have on my bedstand a little a little coffee maker that I set up in the morning. So when I wake up, all I have to do, the first thing I do is roll over and turn on the coffee maker, and then I get a nice hot cup of coffee right there while I'm still lying in bed.
Bill, that's amazing, and I am currently also living in a small space. I've been traveling in a van the last several months. I happen to be in an Airbnb right now, but I have been living in a van, and my routine in some ways is similar. And of course, there are some things about living in a bigger house that one does miss, of course. But I have really started to appreciate the compactness and the convenience of being in that small space, because I can honestly, I could be putting on my pajamas in the morning as I'm heating up the water in my little kettle, as I'm pulling up my computer. Like, I can just do so many things without having to move. So it's yeah, it's making me a little bit lazy.
It's wonderfully economical and efficient. I really like that, living in a small space, because you also get rid of so much clutter that you tend to accumulate all the time. And you just, okay, I'm only going to use what I actually need. And then you find out it really isn't nearly as much as you think you need.
Bill, for those of us who may not know who you are, could you please tell
Sure,
us?
sure. So I'm a philosophy professor here at UNLV. I started climbing at Smith Rock I'm not sure if it was the fall of 76 or the spring of 77, but I started climbing there. And at the time, I climbed mostly with my best friend at the time, a person named Alan Watts, who I'm sure many of your listeners know who that is. And we sort of worked up through the grades and went to college. And then about the time I graduated from college, I decided I wanted to try to pursue an academic career in philosophy. So I left Central Oregon and went actually to get a joint doctorate in philosophy and cognitive science at UC San Diego. Alan, of course, stayed behind. And there's a funny story about that, because I think as I was leaving, I thought at that time Smith Rock was climbed out because everybody was climbing cracks. And I said to Alan, it's just a shame you're going to waste away here in this no-name climbing area where you're just going to be forgotten. You're such a talented climber. And I often tell people that's the wrongest I've ever been about just about anything, telling him that Smith was climbed out. This was in 1982. So anyhow, I went ahead and got my doctorate and did a little climbing around San Diego. But then towards the end of my dissertation work, I realized I really needed to focus on academia. And then I took my very first job out of graduate school, was at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And I wasn't climbing as much then, but on a trip that I had taken to the New River Gorge, I think this was in maybe 91 or 92, I met Porter Gerard, and he started telling me about this area he was developing in Kentucky called the Red River Gorge. And I looked on the map and I realized it wasn't that far away. And plus, I just completely, totally missed climbing. I mean, I was enjoying my academic life. I was enjoying teaching at Notre Dame, but I really, really missed climbing. And so I wound up going down there, I think in a weekend, sometime like in 93 or 94. And I was so blown away by the cliffs there and the walls and the hollers and everything that I realized that this is sort of like my dream thing. And also, by that time, there's this new type of climbing called sport climbing. And, it's like neat. You don't have to place gear and worry about dying. You get just clip these nice bolts. And so I started getting back into it. And I always tell the story that I was going down like maybe once every 2 months. And then in a little bit of time, I was going down once a month. And then the next thing I knew, I was going down every single weekend. And I did that consistently, probably from around 1994 till I left that area in 2007 and came out to Las Vegas. So the drive was getting to me. It was a 7-hour each way drive. And even though I really loved the climbing at the Red and was able to get in on some of the development there, places like the Mother Lode, I eventually wanted to closer to actual climbing where I could do it during the week. And I wanted to be close to my family, was still living in Oregon at the time. So I had been on sabbatical and I'd lived in Las Vegas, and I came to realize that Vegas is such a phenomenal zone to live in for climbing. You just have every type of climbing is world-class, multi-pitch, bouldering, sport climbing, that I realized that if I could somehow move out here, that would be great. And I talked to the chair of the department, and they, as it happened, they had an opening. And so I took the job here. I think I came out in 2007. And I'm absolutely thrilled with that decision. It was the best decision I could have made. I love climbing here. I love the climbing community here. And so I'm still going at it here in Las Vegas. I guess that's coming up on here almost 20 years later, 18 years later. So that's who I am. The type of philosophy I do, I specialize in how the brain works, how the brain represents information. That's my area of specialization. But I really, really love climbing, and I'm still kind of going at it. I'm about to be 65, and I'm currently working on a 514. I'm getting pretty close on. I've done one 514 since I turned 60, and a couple 13Ds and upper 13. So yeah, it's still going well.
Amazing, Bill. You are a philosopher meets climber, and you're balancing these two worlds. That, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. And for those of us who are not watching this in video, Bill, you have more books crammed into your study than, probably like most climbers I know, and their
Don't think I've read them all. I haven't read them all
inventory
yet.
of. No, I think that's beautiful. Do you actually read physical books outside of work? Are you reading physical books or are you on an e-reader? Like, you have not made the move yet?
I'm a physical book person. I like to make notes in the margins. I like to underline things. Sometimes the notes I make, I need to censor. If I was to Xerox a page to give to students to read, I need to blank out what I actually said in response to what somebody else is saying. But no, I love physical books. I like taking them with me. I like just having that thing in my hand. So I'm very much a physical book person.
Bill, most climbers I meet, at least climbers at a high level, they are, let's say, dirtbags. They have made climbing the central focus of their life. Sometimes you also meet desk workers, who have somehow been able to just minimize the amount of work they do to be able to just put everything into their sport. In some ways, you are neither. You have had this full career as a academician, as a philosopher, as a writer, and you're also training and projecting at a very high level, and you've been doing that for many decades. So here's maybe a simple but not so simple question. How do you balance these two very different worlds?
To me, having the two different worlds is actually an asset. I often think that if all I was doing was philosophy, I wouldn't be as happy doing it, because I would get somewhat bored with it, and I would just it would just be too much of one thing. But I also feel the same way about climbing. I know there are professional climbers, and that's what they focus upon. But I think if that was me, I would not really be happy just going climbing all the time. So I love having the two worlds that I can go back and forth on days when I'm having a hard climbing day and it's going hard. I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm going to be doing philosophy tomorrow. And then on days when the philosophy is really hard, I'm glad that I'm going to be going climbing the next day. And they balance each other out really well, I think. There's a lot of overlap, actually, I've noticed. When I'm working on a hard climbing project, I love the projecting process. I love this campaign that I do where I'm constantly trying to tweak things and figure things out and adjust things here and come back to things and think about it when I'm away from it, stuff like that. And frankly, that's very similar to working on a philosophical paper, a philosophical problem, where you try different things, you can tweak things and things over there. I'm a fiddler. I like fiddling with things. And so they're both involving a great deal of problem solving. And the truth is, problem solving is a lot of fun. So there's a lot of similarity in terms of engaging in those two different kinds of projects. It's just that one's more physical than the other. But I'm really happy. Now, there are times, of course, when I'm getting close on a project and maybe some dimension of work will be really distracting. I'll really have to focus on, maybe I've got a deadline coming up. I've got something writing that's completely unrelated to climbing. And then that makes things a little bit tougher at times. But, I'm still grateful that I have these two kinds of lives, that I can kind of still do at a fairly high level, be a scholar and be an athlete, I think that's a pretty fulfilling existence. And so for me, doing both is actually beneficial. It helps me, I feel like.
I can relate in some ways, Bill, because I know that when I'm working hard, I've also had an intense professional career off and on. And then when I'm working really hard and I can't go climbing, I am jonesing hard to go climbing.
Mhm.
And then when I'm climbing, and I'm actually climbing, I feel like it's this precious commodity that I have to then pour everything into. And then at some point, when you go through a climbing trip or you complete a climbing project, you start like asking for that cerebral stimulation that you get from going back to work. So I've also found that maybe not at the same level as you, that they can help also provide complementary levels of fulfillment, because if one does not send one's project or does not have like whatever one may have wanted out of a climbing trip, that can be sometimes a little bit innovating.
Yeah,
So one knowing that there's something else at work that could be equally exciting to get back to is great.
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's kind of nice when one's a little bit down, the other one can be up, and you can kind of rely on focusing things. And there are different times in my life when I'm more focused on one than the other. But to have them both, I mean, again, I think that's why I was initially, at least, not real happy at Notre Dame, because, you're out there in the cornfields, and I'm just sort of like, I really, really missed the climbing. And so now that I have that balance, you're absolutely right. They complement one another. I do think probably a lot of people have that experience with other dimensions of their life. I know a lot of people who are climbers have families, and that's something that they find tremendously gratifying and fulfilling. And so that's where they get that sort of same kind of alternative energy, I guess, that complements their climbing. But for me, it's kind of neat because it involves really enjoyable activity of puzzle solving in both of them. And it's
Sure.
really fun in climbing because you get a puzzle solved with your body, which is really neat.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24/7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code Ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code Ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
I'm curious, Bill, do your academic colleagues, do they know you're a beast at the crag? Do they know
Uh,
about this double
they,
life you have?
I think some of them do. I definitely think a lot of the professional philosophers know to some degree about my climbing exploit. There's actually a group called Philosophers Who Climb, and I'm a member of that on Facebook. And they've maybe seen YouTube videos or something like that, or they've heard some stories. Or my students, I'm not so sure how much they know. They might see me kind of limp into class sometimes, and maybe have some blood on my hands or something like that. And they're like, "Oh, I wonder what Ramsey was up to last weekend." But I think a few colleagues in other places have also had students come up to them and go, "Do you know this old philosopher named Ramsey who goes rock climbing?" Because of course, rock climbing is so popular now. It seems like kids at most universities do it. And I think some of my colleagues, oh yeah, I know that guy. So yeah, so people I think know a little bit about it.
Got it. Well, flipping it, does the climbing community actually get what you do for a living? I mean, they might know you as a philosophy professor, but like, I can only imagine maybe some hilarious conversations around the crag or the campfire where people might be like, "Wait, you teach what again?"
Yeah. Well, first off, everybody confuses philosophy with psychology, so that's the number one. And thankfully, I do the philosophy of psychology, so there's a bit of overlap there. But no, I mean, there's actually been times when I've been at a rest, like a knee bar rest on a route at rifle, and somebody's asked me some philosophical question, and I'll launch into one of my lectures while in this knee bar or something like that. I try to explain to people the area of specialization that I work in, and they just usually glaze over. They just, to me, it seems sort of obvious because I'm in that rabbit hole and I've gone down those details and I know the field. But when I try to explain to people what I do, they're just like, yeah, okay, hand me the greenery, let's go climbing. So I think that I've had a number of people come to my class. So different climbers are curious about, I teach a very large introductory class. And number of climbers they want to check it out. And I'm always open. Anybody who wants can come to my introductory class. It's a public university. And so I remember there was one semester, Jonathan Segrist and a group of his friends, Neely, came to my class for a number of sessions and heard about free will and determinism. In fact, Jonathan and his buddies were traveling through Europe, and I sent them one of my lecture recordings on free will and determinism that they listened to. So people are really cool. And it's not surprising because in my experience, climbers tend to be a pretty intellectual bunch, at least the people that get really into it, the ones who enjoy the problem-solving process. And many of them are intellectuals themselves, doctors, lawyers, people working in engineering and things like that. They're people who like problem-solving with their mind, and mathematicians and physicists. And a good friend of mine I just had a birthday dinner with is a chemistry professor at UNLV. So people are, climbers tend to be a pretty bright group of individuals. And so they kind of get it a little bit. And then it's really neat when they do indeed come to my class and we can talk about what I've been talking about a little bit more.
I love it, Bill. Well, next time I am rolling through Vegas,
Please do.
Check out if this introductory class is in session. One last question on this topic before we move on, I promise. Many years ago, I remember I was recommended some intro book on philosophy. I think it was called Sophie's Choice.
Right.
And I remember reading it.
It's Sophie's World. It's called Sophie's World.
Sorry. Yes. So anyway, if somebody listening to this podcast could not come to your classes or watch your YouTube lectures, if you could recommend maybe just a book or two on how to learn about like the fundamentals of philosophy, would you have one?
That's a great book. It's got a little more of a historical orientation than I have. It's sort of going through some historical figures and what sort of contribution they made, but it's a brilliant book. It's really well done. In fact, at Notre Dame, we used to have all the incoming freshmen read that before coming in. So that's a really, really good book. That's a good recommendation. Another book by a philosopher named Tom Nagel that's a pretty good introduction to some of the major areas, and it's really short. It's called What Does It All Mean? Or What It All Means. Let's see here. Is it up there? It's something like What It All Means or What Does It All Mean? And it's by Thomas Nagel. And that's actually a pretty good introduction as well. And there's a number of anthologies that are really good. There's one called The Philosophy of the Quest for Truth. And I use that in my introductory class. But it's a customized version because I had them take out a bunch of the readings I don't use and put in some readings that I do use. So there's actually quite a lot of interesting philosophy that's out there. I was just this week teaching Peter Singer. And a lot of people know him as a major public philosopher who does really important work in practical ethics. He's really kind of the inspiration for the effective altruism movement. I was teaching his really famous essay called Famine, Affluence, and Morality about our moral obligations to those in need in more impoverished areas of the world. So yeah, his books are really good. His books are really important. He has a really important book called The Life You Can Save that's actually really well done. So yeah, there's just all sorts of stuff that's out there.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know. I'm going to go and start looking up all those books, and I encourage our listeners to do as well if you are curious about learning some philosophy. Bill, I don't want to dwell on the past too much, but it is important to acknowledge that you have been a foundational figure in the sport. We just talked about your beginnings at Smith Rock a second ago. You were climbing with Alan Watts during the birth of sport climbing, and Alan is, I think, acknowledged as the father of sport climbing, at least in the US. You guys were helping define what was possible. Looking back now, what are you proudest from the era? And yeah, let's just start with that.
Well, I mean, I think Alan now says it periodically that it was my influence or some of my influence that helped give him the drive to push himself pretty hard. And I think that was true. He was certainly doing that for me. And looking at what he wound up accomplishing, and he deserves all the credit because I had left Smith Rock. I thought I was climbed out. And so I was in graduate school in California in 1983 when he first started drilling things like chain reaction and Watts Tots and things like that. They were kind of considered now to be some of the very first sport climbs that were done. So he deserved a lot of that credit without a doubt. But it was nice to have that kind of role and give him some sort of incentive. Another really talented climber in Oregon at that time was an individual named Chris Jones. And he and I free climbed Monkey Face at that time. So that was the first free ascent of that pinnacle. And Chris did a lot of that work, but it was a great time to be there. It was a completely different era. I just was completely sucked in and loved the sport of climbing, even though really at that time, no one was really doing it. There were no climbing gyms. We would go out to Smith Rock, even on a busy weekend, there maybe be 2 or 3 or 4 other climbers. It just, it just wasn't that popular of a thing to do. But, I, insofar as I helped push Alan at all, I'm proud of that because he, of course, in many ways sort of defined the sport as it's done today and really changed the direction of the sport. I mean, probably somebody else would have done something similar, but he really was the impetus for a lot of the way in which the sport developed in later years. So insofar as I had any kind of role to play in that, I'm proud of that.
Amazing. Is Alan still climbing much?
Yeah, he goes out to Smith Rock all the time, and he's had problems with his fingers. He had this period where he tried to climb every day for an entire year, and he just developed really bad arthritic overuse problems. But I do know he goes out on a regular basis, and I'm really glad to see him now kind of getting some attention and getting some love. He goes out there, and I think he just loves to see what people are up to out there and tell stories about Smith Rock. So I think there's a good chance if you spend any time at Smith Rock, there's a good chance you're going to bump into Alan. But I know he's climbing out there. We climbed together, probably 2 or 3 years ago when I was out there. I was out there briefly for sabbatical and was doing some climbing at Smith, and we climbed together. So it's great to see him out there and on the rope and all that good stuff again.
I'm guessing this was sometime in the 70s when you guys were first putting up.
Yeah, what's interesting is both of our fathers climbed together, and my dad did a lot of first ascents out at Smith Rock, and Alan's dad did a lot of things in the mountains and at Smith. And actually, what's kind of wild is that Alan and I were born on the same day in the same hospital, and I'm sure our fathers were looking at the maternity ward and asking each other if they thought we would ever climb together. And sure enough, 16 years later, 17 years later. So yeah, that was probably, we started climbing together. It was either the fall of 76 or the spring of 77. I can't quite remember which it was. But, we both were completely bit by the climbing obsession and got completely 100% into it and just loved it all the time. And it was a special time to be out there when it was still pretty empty at Smith Rock. It's not that way now.
Well, yes, you were right there with Alan at the beginnings. And several decades hence. What's surprised you the most, Bill, about how the sport has evolved? If you had to pick one thing.
Just the sheer numbers. I mean, it's just insane how popular it's become. Like I said, when I started, there were no climbing gyms, there were no climbing holds, there were no fingerboards, there were no campus boards, there were no system walls. All that sort of stuff is new. I guess looking back, I shouldn't be so surprised, quite frankly, because climbing has an advantage in the following sense. It's one of those sports where to get better at it, you just need to do it a lot, and doing it a lot is really fun. So, I mean, there are some sports like, I guess, track and field or swimming where training for it is hard work. You got to do laps in the pool, or you got to go for a long run. Weightlifting too, maybe certain sports that require upper body strength, you have to weight lift, and that's kind of drudgery. But especially now with the boards that are out there, to train for climbing, you can just go have fun trying to do these hard boulder problems for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And it's super, super enjoyable. And you'd never guess that this qualifies as a workout. And I think what's happened is with the climbing gyms, with the advent of climbing gyms, more and more people have come to appreciate that fact that you can get a really good form of exercise. And at the same time, you're doing something that's really interesting and challenging and fun and enjoyable. And so, in a way, I shouldn't be surprised at its popularity, but it is still stunning to go to places like Smith now and not be able to park because there's so many people in the park, or to go to places like the Motherlode at the Red River Gorge. When we started climbing at the Motherlode, we were the only ones there. And now to see the kind of crowds that are there, that is kind of shocking. But in a way, as I say, I probably shouldn't find it too terribly surprising because climbing is just such a wonderful activity. It's just such a fun thing to do.
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this.
Absolutely. And climbing has exploded. I was climbing also at the Red in, let's say, the mid 2000s, the time where you could park right outside Miguel's and start chatting with Miguel and just, throw your tent behind the backyard. And now I guess Miguel's is this institution, and there are people out there wearing like a Miguel shirt, and they don't actually know who Miguel is or
Yeah.
what that represents, but they happen to have, some tchotchke from the Red. So when I was starting to climb there, Bill, I had started hearing about you, and I don't know if it was from hearsay or maybe the guidebooks, the early ones. And I loved poring over guidebooks. I still do. And another rumor that I heard or read about was that even back then you had figured out innovative ways to train for your projects because you're working hard. You were like you said earlier, you were like a weekend or a holiday warrior, and you had managed to get a tread wall installed at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And is that correct? Like, were you training on a tread wall back in those days at
Yeah.
the university?
Yeah. So when I decided to get back into climbing, this is probably 93, 94, I went all in and I bought a house that had a large attic so I could build a climbing gym in the attic. And then I had been visiting Alan in Oregon. And at that time, he was still working for Entrepreneur America, which was at that time one of the main they still are one of the main manufacturers of climbing walls and climbing holds. And Entrepreneur had marketed an actual tread wall, a motorized tread wall. It was called the Rock and Roll Machine, and there may be a few still floating around. But I'd seen this and I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing for route training because you just get insanely pumped on this and you can get a really good workout. And then I went back to South Bend, and a year or two later, one of the health clubs I found out had one of these. And I would go in, I joined the club, I would go in and I would use it. And eventually one of the managers came up to me and said, you're the only one here using it. I think we're going to get rid of this thing. And I'm like, okay, can we buy it off you? And they're like, yeah, you can have it for $500 if you take it out. So I immediately contacted Notre Dame, and we were just starting a climbing club at that time at Notre Dame. And they had an old racquetball court, and they were going to build a little climbing gym in. And then right next to the racquetball court was the laundry room that they used for the laundry. There was a famous gym called the Rocky Memorial Gym. People who've gone to Notre Dame, you know what gym I'm talking about. And so they placed this rock and roll machine. We had somebody fly out from Montreal and help us take it apart and put it together. And man, once I got a hold of that thing, I was off to the races because during the week, I could train power and bouldering in my climbing gym. I had a campus board there. I could do kind of hard power things. And then on Wednesdays, I would go into the Rockney and I would train just endurance and power endurance on the tread wall. And to this day, I still use a tread wall. The local climbing gym here, Refuge. Again, it's the same story. I'm the only one who uses it. Maybe 2 or 3 other climbers use it. But I use it for training for route climbing. And I still believe that it's one of the apparatus or one of the training tools that is wildly underutilized for people who want to climb on routes and train for route climbing. It's the equivalent. I mean, I think I remember reading a story one time where a woman won a marathon. She just had a baby, and so all of her training for the marathon was done on a treadmill. But nonetheless, she could get in shape on the treadmill and go ahead and win an actual marathon. And that's exactly how I feel about the tread wall. It's just incredible for training endurance. And if you set it up properly, I think a lot of people don't know how to set them up. But if you set them up properly, you'll have maybe 4 or 5 routes, which is one rotation. And then you just try to do link ups at different angles or different speeds. And you just, you get progressively harder and you just get ridiculously pumped. And it's fun because then you go to the climbing gym and you're like, okay, today I'm going to try to do the red route into the purple route, into the, polka dot route and see if I can get that far without falling off. And so it's a neat thing. It's a little bit more like drudgery. It's not as much fun as, trying to do a bunch of boulder problems on the tension board or on the moon board or on the kilter board or any of the boards. But it's still, I feel like, has substantially helped me with my route climbing because it's given me a little bit more endurance and it's kind of enabled me to learn to climb efficiently and climb well, even when I'm kind of redlining, even when I'm really, really pumped. So I actually think it's quite beneficial.
That's a great point. I remember the training tools from that era, maybe just after the years that you were training. I mean, I'm talking about 22 odd years ago when I started climbing. And I remember, tread walls were not common. However, somehow you would occasionally spot a tread wall at a place that would surprise you. For example, I remember visiting the Chelsea Piers gym in New York, again, 20 odd years ago. And there was this tread wall sitting in a corner. And nobody was using it because probably, they probably installed it. The one person who probably knew how to actually show somebody how to use it was not usually present. So it would just sit there. And I was like, wow, this is such a waste,
Yeah.
Let's talk present day. You have another hard project on the radar. Can you tell us what you are working towards and maybe what's driving you at this stage?
Yeah. So this is a hard climb up at Mount Charleston at an area called Robbers Roost. It's an extension of an extension. So one of the most popular routes up there is a 12A called Highwayman. And then there's an extension of that's 13. It's called Highway Robbery. And then there's the extension of that's called Wrongdoer, and it's 14A. And I've been working it now for a little over a year. I got really close on it last fall and fell off basically the last move 2 or 3 times. And then my last time up there before the weather turned bad, I figured out a much better sequence to use on the last move. So I kind of kicked myself in the butt for not figuring that out beforehand. But now we're having a kind of unusual warm spell here in Vegas. And so I'm actually getting to climb on it a lot earlier than I thought I would. And I had a pretty good day yesterday, actually. I made it through kind of a really, really hard section from the ground. And so it started to come together already. So I'm happy about that. And there's just, in this area, there's just so many routes like that and so many projects to do. I did a 13D last year. That's a classic Randy Levitt climb at this place called the Fossil Clave. It's called the Homo Sapiens. It's really, really brilliant. The year before that, I did it's rated 14B, but I think talking to Honnold, we both use quite a bit of knee bars on it. It's probably more like 14A the way I did it. But that was a really fun climb. That was a really great climb. So, I feel like I'm still able to climb routes at the upper level, at least, doing some 14s. And it's interesting because I feel good about being able to climb at that level, but there's definitely a drop off. And, I think when you get to be towards your mid 50s, late 50s, you're starting to kind of well, I know I'm never going to get stronger again. I'm not going to get really stronger, but I just kind of want to maintain what I have. And then as you get into your early 60s, you're kind of there's a bit of diminishment, but I want to slow down the diminishment. And that's kind of takes a little bit of psychological adjustment to kind of recognize, because so much of, so much of many people's willingness to work hard is that they want to get stronger. You want to get a little bit better. And to kind of know that you're not going to get stronger, you kind of got to reconceptualize what your motivation is. And sort of for me, though, I mean, you just, you change the narrative a little bit. And now the narrative is, okay, I feel pretty good. I'm trying to climb a 514 at 65. That's actually, I should be pretty happy about that. That's an unusual thing. That's kind of rare. That doesn't happen very often. So now that becomes the motivation instead of this desire to, keep getting better and better. Now the motivation is, well, I want to do this, something that's a little bit special, climb at a pretty high level at an older age. So that then becomes the drive. And so, yeah, you just got to, I always sort of say that the key to keeping at it is, you always call it getting air. You got to be adaptable, you got to be innovative, and you got to be resilient. And, in terms of adaptability, there's going to be change in the sport. 50 years, I've been climbing 512 for 5 decades, 6 decades, actually, from the 70s into the 20s, and 514 for 4 decades. And you got to adapt. You got to change. There's going to be changes in the equipment. There's going to be changes in the style of climbing. There's going to be changing in sort of what counts and what the attitudes are among climbers, at least some changes. So you got to be willing to adapt. And you got to be innovative. You got to make adjustments. One example, I found that as I got older, my circulation's not as good. And so I don't really do as well in the cold. And if a climb is powerful down low and it's cold, I completely numb out. And so this climb I was trying up at the Clearlight Cave, and to some degree as the climb I was trying yesterday, that's an issue. You can't really climb when you're completely numb. But what I figured out was if you take ice to the cliff, or if there's snow on the ground, you can completely freeze your hands before you get on the climb and then heat them up. Like I put in 3 or 4 hand warmers in a chalk bag and then completely heat them up. And then you're good to go for half an hour, 40 minutes. And so that's just one way in which you have to be innovative, it seems to me, is you got to change the way you're doing things to adapt to the fact that you're getting older and there's going to be certain sorts of hindrances. And then just, you got to be resilient. I mean, I think especially when I got into my late 50s, I just realized that, there's going to be aches and pains, and that's just going to come with the game. And you can whine about it and you can stop climbing, but no, to me, that I'm not going to take up shuffleboard. So I realized that it's going to just require getting used to the fact that you got to be somewhat resilient, and you got to deal with the aches and the pains and do your best to cope. And keep a bottle of Advil in your pack at all times, and just recognize that that's how the game gets played now. Sometimes I see young people and they're, I tweaked this, I'm going to take a week off, or this kind of hurt, this feels a little weird, I'm going to take a couple weeks off. Well, I mean, if I had that attitude, I'd never go climbing, because there's never a time really when something isn't hurting. But to some degree, that's true of all serious athletes. I mean, I think all serious athletes who try to perform at a high level, they've always got something a little bit off. There's always a little bit something that hurts. And so you just got to realize that that's just part of it. And I think once you kind of come to grips with that, I mean, of course, if you break your leg, you break your leg. You're not saying walk it off. But I mean, there are going to be these little aches and pains, and things are going to hurt, and you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to cope with it. And there's going to be other things that make it harder. You're going to take a lot longer to recover. But the benefits are just amazing. And the fact that I can still kind of be playing this game at this age, I wouldn't trade that for anything. So for me, it's very, very much worth it. You get to go to these amazing locations. These venues are incredible. You get to hang out with some of the greatest people, the best people. We've got a really great climbing community here right now. And you just get to still have a lot of fun. And so to me, all the aches and pains and the need to adapt, it's all worth it, because it's still a really enjoyable time.
Bill, if I can ask, how old are you now?
So I'm 64, but probably by the time this comes out, I'll be 65 in a few weeks. So let's just say roughly 65, couple 3 weeks.
Happy early birthday, Bill. I'm sure it's a certainty. Yes, you will climb this 514 at Robbers Roost at Mount Charleston. Will that make you the oldest person to have climbed 514? Would you know that?
I don't know that, actually. I mean, I know Chuck Odette. I know you interviewed him, and I know he did one at a pretty old age. or older. So I don't know quite when he did his route, but that's just the Americans I'm familiar with. I feel like when you go to Europe, everybody's climbing 514. They're people's grandparents are climbing 514. So I don't know what's going on over there. I don't know of many other people in their 60s right now who are climbing. I mean, if I do this one, I may be one of the few people to climb 2 of them in their 60s. But get used to it, because quite frankly, the people who are coming up, Steve McClure and Chris Sharma, those guys are going to be climbing much, much harder in their 60s. I mean, I can see McClure climbing 14D, 9A in his 60s. He's just an amazing climbing machine. And Sharma as well. I feel like I'm not that far off my absolute limit. I mean, the hardest I've ever climbed is 14B. I did a couple of those. I've done 7 of those, but I did a couple when I was in my 50s. And, I'm not that far off of that. And you got people climbing 15Cs and 15Ds nowadays. So I think 515 in the 60s will become kind of not that uncommon.
Certainly, Bill. Well, what you are doing is you are pushing the thresholds for this era of what is possible. And you're today, it feels ludicrous to be able to climb at that level in 160s, but you are helping normalize the standards so that, I mean,
well, thanks.
For the rest of us, who are not Sharmas or McLeod's or Andres, I mean, even if you're not climbing at that level, I think it just gives us hope that we can continue pushing that inevitable decline, where I think what I'm really learning here is that 2 things from you, Will, which is, one is that one can continue performing at a more advanced age, right?
I'm old. Come on, just say it. I'm old.
40s, 50s, 60s. So, those of us who are either younger or maybe even older, that, we can continue to push ourselves, be resilient, come up with like hacks and stratagems, like the one that you just instructed us on, which is like, hey, if it's too cold, put your, get your hands used to the screaming burpees early on by doing that. But then the other thing, which is I think even deeper, is helping, in your words, like reconceptualize, because I think one thing again that happens when we get older is, one is not always advancing at that rapid rate. I don't know about you, but lately I've been climbing a lot with people in their early to mid 20s. Actually, I would say I've done that a lot. The age of those people have stayed the same. It's just that I have gotten older, and I've been climbing with, for example, I was in El Salto recently, and I climbed with somebody who went up like 5 letter grades in like 2 months.
Yeah.
And
crazy.
And that just seems crazy. And I think it's difficult to impress upon somebody in the 20s that life is not limitless. And I think what you're helping us learn is that we can just reframe that. And anything else, Bill, on those notes on how one can find joy in one's ability at that moment, not necessarily what the past is or what the future holds?
Well, I mean, first off, I think that to some degree you have to enjoy that process. Like, I love projecting. I really enjoy these climbs. Have so many secrets and so many things they try to hide from us, and trying to sort of unlock all those little Easter egg type things on the climb. That is so enjoyable. And I don't want to tell people that, because if I have to explain that to you, you don't get it. I mean, but if you get it, you know what I'm talking about. And that continues. There's no reason for that to stop. A lot of times I think people present a false dichotomy where they're like, okay, I'm either going to really keep trying really hard and really going to keep training, or I'm just going to climb for fun and just climb 5 nines. It's like, no, there's all this area in between where you can still be trying pretty hard. You can still be really gratified with the effort. You can still be working to get, to maintain what you have, and sometimes maybe get a little bit stronger. But you're not necessarily trying. I mean, I listened to your interview with Jerry Moffat, and for him, his motivation was to be the best, be the absolute best. Well, you're not going to be that in your 60s. You're not going to be the best climber. But there's still other ways in which you can push yourself. And you're only, even if you're not going to be as good as you were when you were 35, you can enjoy it and strive hard and action be just as proud as anything you climbed in your 30s or even your 20s, doing it in your 60s. And so that motivation and that drive all stays the same. It's just that you're kind of like now shifting away from, okay, I'm going to get much stronger this season. This is going to be my top season. I'm going to climb my hardest route ever, to something a little bit different. It was like, okay, now I'm going to try to perform at a pretty high level, which is a bit unusual at this age. And that's really going to be my goal. And I want to climb at this level at this age. And honestly, I suspect, so many of your guests probably know exactly what I'm talking about, whether it be marathon running or mountain biking or surfing or whatever it is. It's like, it's still pretty cool to be doing this thing at this level, at this advanced age. And that in itself becomes a real sort of gratifying and fulfilling dimension. I mean, there's all these studies done on Paralympics and people who have, maybe they were a world-class, I don't know, basketball player, but they got in a car wreck, they were paralyzed, and now they're playing, they're in a wheelchair, and they're playing wheelchair basketball. Well, studies on people's happiness and their enjoyment of the activity and their gratification, their fulfillment of what they get out of that. Sure, initially they're bummed because they're in a wheelchair, but then you check with them 6 months later and like, this is just as much intense and just as fun, and I'm just as driven as I was when I was not in any way handicapped. And I think that's the way you can view age as well. Yeah, you're going to be diminished, but you're still going to be really into your projects, and you're going to be really into trying to do what you can and work with what you have and still trying to accomplish hard stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing. It's interesting you brought up, climbing with people who are so much younger. I do that. Yesterday, I was climbing with a really, really strong climber, Andrew Nimmer, up at Mount Charleston. He's 29. And I, for the most part, love these kids. I think they're great. They share. I mean, I say you got to adapt because they're into different types of music and they're into different kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they're into the same stuff I was into in 1977. They're not that different. They enjoy the process just like I did, and it's fun. The one thing that's kind of interesting about doing something for so long is, and this is kind of neat in a way, but it's a little bit sad too, is if you sort of think, well, what's the average lifespan of a typical climber who's working pretty hard? Like, what's their climbing career? It's somewhere around 10 or 15 years. And so when you've been doing it for 50 years, you actually cycle through multiple generations, right? I mean, it's kind of like what you get in sort of vampire literature, where these immortal types cycle through generations after generations after generations. And there's a little bit of something like that. I mean, I look at the climbing community I have here now. They're great people. They're super fun to hang out with. They're really motivating. And there's a few of them that were there when I first moved here, but almost all of them are different than the climbing community I was hanging out with when I moved here in 2008, 2009, 2010. And then that climbing community is, of course, very different than the climbing community and the people I was hanging out with in the 90s. So you sort of have this weird experience where you get to meet all these great people all the time, and it keeps cycling and changing. But you also get a little bit nostalgic as well, because you've shared so many experiences with these people who maybe aren't still climbing, they're not still doing it as much. And you have all these great memories of these past times with past communities. So that's a little bit of a kind of oddity that comes with climbing for so long, as you cycle through multiple generations of climbing communities. But they're all typically really good people and really fun to hang out with.
Well, I'm 46 now, and yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk gives me some goosebumps, because that's already happening with me. People I was climbing with over the years have changed. As Bill, I just recently went and listened to this podcast you did on the Nugget, excellent climbing podcast with Stephen Dimmitt. And at that time, I think you were about to complete or working on your prior 14A. I think it was the one in Mount Clark. I think perhaps Jumbo Pumping Height.
Jumbo Pumping Height, yeah.
I remember you saying that something on the lines of that time is running out, and you feel that pressure. And here you are now, 4 or 5 years later, and you are still going at it, a climb that's just as hard, takes just as much effort. So in that conversation, was that humility, or was that genuinely not being aware of what your superpowers are and how you have continued
I think
push?
Yeah, I think at that time I was just unsure about what things were going to be like, and I was a little bit in a vulnerable position because I believe I can't remember if he interviewed me before or after I did jumbo pumping eight, but I was really suffering from needing a new hip, and so I was about to in fact, I did the climb like a week before surgery, and so I talk about being resilient. There were many days coming down from the third tier of Clark, which is a big hike, where I was kind of almost on my hands and knees part of the way, and it was pretty tough. And but so I was like, I don't know if this is really the future. This is not easy. Well, the fact of the matter is, I completely misunderstood just how amazing you can come back from that kind of hip replacement surgery. I had an incredibly skilled climber who's also a 514 climber, Eric Kubiak, do the hip replacement, and I could not be possibly happier. I mean, the flexibility in the new hip is better than the flexibility ever was in the natural hip. And so I think I was underestimating the extent to which, if you work hard at it, if you really work at it, you can still keep going. And so I was wrong in that podcast, obviously, because I thought, well, 514, I don't know. But then I think it just not that much later, I was in a party with various folks, and they're like, no, you always say that, you're still going to be going at it. So they know me better than I know myself. But that's part of being resilient, and you're going to have injuries. You're going to have to recover from things. You got to be patient. I think I heard you interview Lee, and Lee mentioned something that I feel like I've come across, which is the recovery time is so much longer. Now, the way I do it, the formula I use is that taking 1 day rest off is what climbing the next day was in my 40s. Taking 2 days off is what was having one rest day was like, and taking 3 days off is like what taking 2 days off used to feel like. So you just got to add that extra time to recover. But right now I'm in a state of fitness where I'm actually pretty close to my peak level, and I feel pretty good about that. So yeah, it's possible. There's a little bit of drop off. Not everything works as well as it used to. Sort of an analogy I have is, how like I have these now, I have to wear reading glasses, and you find out why is that? Well, because the little micro muscles in your eyes start to stop working. Well, just think about that happening all throughout your body and all your joints. Like, one thing I've noticed is I'm a much slower hiker, and I feel like I'm just charging, and then people just cruise past me, and I'm like, oh, I'm much slower now. But that's everything just a little bit not working as much, not slowing down. But then you can just train a little harder and do other things to compensate for that. One thing I think that's a kind of secret weapon as you get older is you can actually increase your flexibility. You see these, older yoga masters and what they can do and what they're capable of. And flexibility is a real critical secret weapon in climbing. So you may not be able to get stronger, but you may be able to increase your flexibility so that when you're on a rest, your hips can get even tighter into the wall. And that's taking 6, 7, 8, 9 pounds off. So that can be really quite substantial. So just all the different ways in which you can make tweaks and adjustments and adapt and be innovative. And then I think that you can keep going at a pretty high level. That's the thing that's really I'm finding to be quite gratifying.
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together, training, aging, mindset, and all, you will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
Well, I was hearing you were hiking up to the third tier of Mount Clark. I haven't been there myself, but yeah, the repetition of that hike, it spreads wide. And you were doing that before major hip surgery. So yeah, that felt like, it felt both, let's say, superhuman and maybe even a little unhinged. that you were pushing yourself.
Maybe a little
to
unhinged. I would have to take a long time to come down, so I'd make sure that there was beer in a cooler for all my partners, so they would have something to do while they're waiting for me, so they wouldn't leave me there. So that was always that's another adaptation I would wind up doing. But yeah, now after the surgery, I do think that this is something that you're going to see more climbers needing. Climbers, because you do so much hip turnout work and splits and things like that, just like major league catchers and hockey goalies. They're all people sort of primed for hip replacements. And the one advice I'd give to people is I waited too long. I should have had it done sooner than I did. But just know that if you get it done and you get it done by a good surgeon, especially if you can do an anterior approach, you should fully 100% expect to come back from that. A good friend of mine, James Lucas, just got his hip replaced, and it sounds like he's already climbing. And so, yeah, it's something that I would say if you have a need for that, don't put it off. It can really help.
Yeah, I also was diagnosed with hip dysplasia. It's one of those things I think you're born with. So
Yeah.
I have also like these creaky, jangly hips. But I found that, I maybe thanks to this podcast and learning from people such as yourself that, one just needs to be motivated and, find the right physio, do all the rehab, and maybe a part of it is also mental. Like if you believe that you are going to get weaker and you can't do the hike or can't climb, like you will probably not be. So I think it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think just having that approach, which is that no, you can get past all of those things. You just have to keep bribes for your hiking and climbing partners, and then follow up with mobility in front of the book or the TV at night to keep one limber. Any other techniques, though, that you learned about staying mentally tough through the hip injury, maybe other setbacks you might have had over?
Well,
the
I mean,
decades?
I just believe that, the people that I know can do it for a long time. They're the people who don't take themselves too seriously. And even when things are tough and you're grinding it out, you can still sort of laugh at yourself and enjoy the process and get a kick out of it, especially if you're climbing with fun people to climb with. And so that to me is the key thing, is just make sure you're still enjoying the process. And then everything else just kind of takes care of itself. I mean, I'm pretty old school in terms of my training. There's one sort of slogan that has been associated with me called "more is more," as opposed to "more is less is more." I think that there's one thing that's also surprising about the modern world in climbing is just the explosion of climbing coaches and trainers and programs and all of this plethora of people that are out there who are coming up with training programs for various people. And number one, I find it surprising because for me, I understand why people want to do that, but I would not enjoy any of that, because for me, a good deal of the gratification and satisfaction comes from coming up with my own program, doing the physiological changes I need to do for a particular climb. Like this climb I'm trying, I have to tweak how I'm strong. I got to be strong in a somewhat different way than I was for the climb I was working on in the winter time, and changing the nature of the kind of how much time I'm going to be on the rock. It all has to change, but I enjoy that. I think that's really fun, coming up with a program for myself that I can implement and then see how that implementation actually pays off. That's like a good chunk of how much enjoyment I get out of this process. So that so many people are farming that out to other people, I find a little bit surprising. But in general, a lot of people come to me and they're like, well, should I use Bechtel, or should I use Hurst, or should I use the lattice coil? and I'm like, what I typically say is, I mean, these guys are all working hard to try to figure out what's right. But the reality is that, and I'm sure they would say this as well, these coaches would say this, at least at the top end, is that picking the exact right one that's perfectly suitable for you will make a difference of about 1% of your improvement. And the 99% of your improvement is going to be your dedication, your commitment to the program, your hard work, and your discipline. That's 99% of it. And so when I train, like I'm going to train tomorrow because the weather's turning bad here. So I'm going to train tomorrow And on Friday, tomorrow's Thursday, I'm going to go hard. And each of those days may be around 8 hours of training, 7 or 8 hours of training or something like that. But then I'll take 3 days off or 4 days off. And I have yet to see anything that's just, suppose you have a week of training. And so you have two options. Let's say you train 3 days that week. So let's say Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And then you take 2 days rest in between. And each of those days are pretty hard. They're pretty big. Versus every other day you train. You train 4 days, but you don't train as hard. Now, I think the vast majority of coaches and trainers would say, oh, the latter program's the right one. Do it as much as possible. And I'm like, I have yet to see any reason to think that that latter program would be better than the former program. And one thing that I found is that because you're older, it takes longer to recover. So since it is taking longer to recover, I'm going to have bigger training days. And just sort of gutting it out and training a little bit longer and working hard on those days you train, I find that to be beneficial. But it's tricky because I also think that we tend to overgeneralize, from what we know to everybody. And the thing is that people are unique and people are distinctive. And I recognize that what works for me may well not work, or probably maybe don't work for most other people. So I wouldn't use a coach because I don't think any of those coaches, they know training, they know physiology, but they don't know my physiology. And I feel like when it comes to that kind of expertise with my body and what works for me, I'm the expert. And so I'm not sure where I was going with this, but the bottom line is that I enjoy the process of coming up with my own training regimen and going hard and then, strategizing a way that's going to design my body to work on a particular climb, do the different things I need to do, and then making sure I get plenty of rest. There's no such thing as overtraining in one day. Overtraining is always training too much in 1 week and not giving yourself enough rest to recover. And so make sure as you get older to know that you're going to need more time off. You're going to need more time recovery. You need more time resting. But that doesn't mean you can't have really hard and really big training days as well.
Your approach is somewhat radical, right? It's different from what we are told about training and aging, and I think what I'm learning from you is one is that it starts by having a clear sense of the goal in mind, and then maybe almost working backwards, because you talked about the training you're doing for this project and how that is different than the training you're doing or you were doing for your project this past winter. And I think the needs of that particular goal informs the plan and structure you put in place. Yeah, a lot of us, maybe they don't have, and this, we all different, we all have different, we all trying to get different things out of our sports. Some people are trying things at a very high level, high end. Some people are not. Some people are just trying to stay fit. And the other thing I'm learning from you is, yes, again, it's remarkable you are self-coached at your level. And I'm guessing maybe you think it's also part of the fact that you are indeed, you get joy out of the cerebral nature of being able to really get into. Okay, let me ask you this question. Are you a meticulous note taker? Do
Yes.
you write down, do you quantify how you're doing things versus doing things by feel?
So after this interview, I'm going to sit down and give the minute by minute fingerboarding I'm going to do in the morning, when I'm going to leave the fingerboard to go to train on the tension board and the kilter board, and then what I'm going to do right after that. And it's all going to be laid out as a list of things that I'm going to try to accomplish tomorrow. And so, yes, I am very meticulous like that. And I'm going to just, like, when I do this, I'm pretending it's not me that's going to be doing it. It's just some person out there that I'm coaching who has to do all these things, and they don't like it tough on them, But there's also a part of me, it's like, oh, this will be fun to try to see if I can do all this. This will be kind of interesting to see how this goes. And so it's weird because I think a lot of people find training to be drudgery, and I don't. I find training to be a kind of enjoyable way to spend the day, and you're trying to get personal bests and you're trying to see what you can do in these different sections. And I mean, it's not like doing laps in the pool. Come on. I mean, it's having a good time on the moon board or having a good time on the kilter board. That's fun. even fingerboarding, it's like, okay, you're only hanging. You're really only trying for 7 seconds or 8 seconds, and you get a little bit of a rest. So in terms of the unpleasantness that we normally associate with training, I don't really experience that when it comes to climbing training. And I think it's all kind of a fun way to spend your day, actually. And so, yeah, it's actually quite enjoyable to come up with that kind of strategy. And then I'm kind of motivated. I'm like, oh, this will be interesting to see if I can implement this. Whereas I think a lot of other people just tell me what to do. See, the thing is, I think when you're just like, oh, just tell me what to do, you don't own it in the way that I own my training program. And it's like, oh, I want to see how this unfolds. I want to see how this works. I'm really kind of curious about this. Whereas you're just, oh God, this is the program that so-and-so handed down, and this is going to be so hard, and it's going to be so hard. It's less motivating, it seems to me, because it's more like work, like a work schedule. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this. This will be interesting to see if this goes. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I've always maintained, Bill, that any degree of competence I've achieved at the couple of sports I love, rock climbing and surfing, have been because I've loved the process. I've loved the training. For me, I'm not a swimmer, so it's the idea of swimming laps in the pool, or the idea of going to a gym and just lifting weights endlessly, like I just can't get myself motivated. But yes, when I was training for climbing a lot, like just being by myself and getting on the campus board, or just like doing hangs, I mean, I found that really gratifying. Again, just everybody's program is different, but just to behoove us, could you maybe just quickly walk us through, Bill, of what kind of structure do you have in place? Because I feel like this is such an opportune moment to be talking to you, because you are working towards this goal. So what is your training like?
So there's a core
right
workout. So one thing that I do that's unusual is I train every day, including I train in the mornings a little bit, even on the days I try to have performance days. So even when I'm going to get close on this climb, I'll have a good 2-3 hours in that morning to train. And here's my thinking. When you're working a project, and this is especially true when you're traveling, one of the concerns is that you do get stronger on the project, but you kind of lose your overall fitness. You lose your overall finger strength. I thought at one time, well, you should go climbing fresh. And then after you're done climbing, you should train a little bit afterwards to try to maintain your finger strength and stuff like that. And the problem with that is that a lot of times when you're done climbing, you're kind of beat up and decide to go get dinner with friends. And in the evening, it's tougher. So what I started doing instead, since all my projects are locally, is I'll get up early on a day I'm going to go climbing, and I'll ease into the day. And that means right off the bat, a fingerboard session. I have my own kind of handmade fingerboard that I'd like. It's very comfortable, very pleasant. It's about 13 millimeter rounded edge. And I'll hang, just 10 seconds off of it. Then I'll come back and I'll hang for 30 seconds off of it. And then I'll hang off of a smaller edge for 30 seconds. And I'll add 35 pounds. And I'll go stretch for a bit, come back 8 minutes later, and I'll hang 50 pounds off my harness. And then I'll come back and I'll hang 75 pounds off. Eventually I get up to like 90 pounds. And then I'll do a little kind of mini max hang session where I'm hanging like with 90 pounds added for 7 seconds and then resting like about 80 seconds or something like that. I'm trying to do that 4 or 5 times. And what that does is it kind of at least enables me to maintain some core basic finger strength, even when I'm projecting something and I'm not really in a training mode. And I'll also do some other things as well on a climbing day. Like I have replicated one of the cruxes on this climb in my attic, or not my attic, in my garage. And I'll do that a few times, maybe with a weight belt on or something like that. Just kind of getting it in my spine, that sort of movement that's involved. And then maybe I'll do a couple other little things. But by the time I get to the cliff, I've already been kind of going at it. And I've gotten to my max levels already in the morning. And now you might say, well, doesn't that deplete you? And maybe it does. Maybe it depletes me like 6-7% or 5% or something like that. But I'm still making progress. And I think in the last 10 years, every hard climb I've done that in the morning. So you're able to maintain your basic strength even while you're going through a projecting process, and you're still getting the project done. You're still going to be making progress on the project. Now, tomorrow is going to be more of a sort of serious training day. So I'll do that for like a open hand. I'll do something similar for half crimp. I've got a small edge because this climb I'm trying to do has very tiny edges. So I'll do it like on an 8 millimeter or 6 millimeter, not that much weight, of course, but just kind of building some of the pulp up in my fingertips. That's one of the ways I've changed my training now, is hang off of much smaller edges because this route has much smaller edges. I'll do the cruxes on the climb. I will hang off of a sloper. I'll hang off of a 2-finger pocket and basically have a pretty robust fingerboarding routine. And then probably around noon or 1 o'clock, I'll wrap that up and I'll head over to, like tomorrow, Alex Honnold has a really impressive little home climbing gym with a tension board and a kilter board. So I'll probably head over there and do some training and just do some bouldering for 2 or 3 hours. And then maybe I'll do a little bit after that. Maybe I'll do limit bouldering, and then maybe I'll do 4x4s. And then the next day, I'll get up, do a little bit of warm up fingerboarding again, and then I'll go to the gym and get on the tread wall. And the people that see me at the gym, I'm sure they're like, why is this guy always on the tread wall? Well, it's because I'm doing all my own bouldering in other places. But in any event, I'm on the tread wall, and I'll be on there for probably 3 or 4 hours, trying different link ups, trying to arc a little bit, because the climb I'm trying to do is it's 50 meters long. It's really long. So you're climbing for quite a while continuously. So I'll probably do some arcing. I've changed the routes on the tread wall to have much smaller holds now because I want to practice that. So I'll do the tread roll at a vertical. Usually I'm doing it at about 20 or 30 degree overhang. So I'll do it on that because that's getting me more geared up for this unique feature of this climb, this vertical slab that I got to do, which is some of the hardest climbing on it. So I'll go hard then, and then I'll do some weightlifting afterwards probably, and then I'll take 3 days off. And then I'll probably try to go back up and see what kind of progress I can make after a 3-day rest. So that's what that would entail, tweaking various aspects of the training to make it more specific for the climb that I'm now trying to do, but also kind of doing things that I'm familiar with and just trying to tax myself in a way that's going to not completely tear me down, but beat me down a little bit so that I may be able to make a slight bump up in my strength by the time I get back to this climb. And I'm, like right now, I'm just talking about, I'm getting psyched to sit down with a notepad and start writing out these different exercises that I'm going to do and what schedule I'm going to have and how much time I'm going to give between them and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm actually really kind of looking forward to that.
Well, thanks for walking us through that. That is certainly a very dense block of training. And then, yes, you have planned it in a way where you get that bit of rest. And I'm guessing that it's taken you also some time to arrive at this kind of structured training module. So for those of us who don't quite have their own training mapped out, any tips, Bill, on how they can learn to either work with a coach better or even self-coach themselves so they can like kind of help evolve and fine-tune their own training?
Yeah, I mean, number one is ease into the day. Like I spend over an hour easing into the day, warming up, like just really gradually building up to where I'm going to be doing a max hang. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily have that kind of time, but I mean, I get up early. I get up like at 4:30. And so you got to ease into the day. I have never been injured from being too tired. All my injuries have always been from not properly warming up. So that's number one, is especially as an older athlete, you want to warm up gradually and slowly. And number two is, they always say you should work on things you're not good at, but I kind of think there's something to be said for being in that groove where you're familiar with holding things a certain way, you're familiar with certain types of holds, and just sticking to that as your go-to base core exercise that your body understands and you know how it's supposed to feel. Another thing that's really important, I'm talking about these boards, is a lot of these types of problems are dangerous, and especially for, there's no country for old men. So I'll be on the app and I'll be swiping and I'll look at that. You got to catch that hold with your shoulder in a really vulnerable position. Nope. Swipe right. Oh, look at that one. That gas stone looks kind of dicey. Nope. Swipe right. Just keep swiping and not do these problems that are really taxing on your elbows and your shoulders and your fingers. Well, they want to be taxing, but not in a way that's dangerous. And you can tell these kids are, they're flying everywhere and they're catching things with one finger and their feet are swinging all over the place. And okay, that's fine for the kids to do. But, as you get older, you want to be very selective and very specific on the kinds of problems you get on at the gym or even outside. And you want to avoid those kinds of things that are going to put your joints in a really vulnerable position that can cause problems. So, any kind of like, catching thing really extended with a gas, no, stay away from that. Find something where it's much more straightforward, because you're still going to get fit. You're still going to get strong doing that sort of thing. I think that's actually really important. And then again, it's getting good rest, getting good nutrition, and taking the time off. You can have a big day. And obviously, I think people have said this, because I have kind of been a bit of a hoarder with routines. I just like, oh, that sounds good, I'm going to add that to the schedule. And that's why so often I think my training days are pretty big. And you can do that, just add little things, tweak some little things, add some of those things. But always, always, always make sure you give yourself sufficient time off after you've had a big day, and allow yourself to recover in that way. And I think there's something to be said for icing your fingers and icing your hands that help with a little bit of the swelling. I think those roller things that you use on your forearms, I forget what they're called, but they really can be very helpful in breaking up some of that, some of the ways in which things can get overly swollen in your arms. So all those sorts of tricks I think are actually pretty helpful. But mostly easy to the day, do things that are safe, and then give yourself plenty of time to recover. And then the usual things like, and some of your other guests talk about, which is getting good sleep, getting good nutrition. I mean, one thing that sadly I've really cut out is like I used to have like a pretty hard workout and then have a couple beers, and it's like, that's just too, I mean, I still do every now and then, obviously, but I mean, it really is damaging. It really does make a difference. And I feel like I recover better when I abstain from any kind of alcohol after a training session. So that's kind of sad, but that's how it is. So, but in any event, those are the main things I would recommend.
But you are allowed to have a frothy one after this podcast.
Maybe one.
No, thank you. What about other simple things, Bill? Like you talked about, you doing some self massage. Are you regular about like other kinds of body work? Just making sure that all those little things stay.
You're not going to believe this, but I've never actually ever had a sports massage. I've never had a massage. I had somebody buy one for me for my 40th birthday, and I was working at 14B at that time, called Super Tweak up in Utah. And I told myself, oh, okay, I'll get one after I climb this climb. And then I did the climb, and by that time I've completely forgot about it, and I never wound up getting the sports massage. So that's obviously, I know that's helpful. I know that's beneficial. Seeing physical therapists makes a lot of sense. I haven't really done much of that sort of thing. I do think there's a lot of things that happen that are kind of junk science with the cupping and, the tape and all that sort of stuff. I don't think the science really shows that stuff works. But certainly physical therapy and massage, those things are actually quite beneficial. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think people should definitely look into those things. I know a lot of climbers around here have lately gotten into using a sauna as a way to kind of maybe relax the muscles and recover a little bit better. I don't know what the literature shows on that, but that's something people have found quite popular. So yeah, I think keep an open mind and see what other people are doing and see what makes sense. And look at the science on it, and see what are the ways in which you can keep pushing pretty hard, but do it in a way that's pretty safe.
But let's talk about this idea of the pain box.
Okay, perfect.
Apparently that term is associated with you in some way. So tell us, what is that all about?
Okay. So I mean, I think I came up with this kind of as an attitude where I think I was studying Stoic philosophy a little bit maybe at the time, but it seemed like in training and like dieting, you're constantly being bombarded with, oh, here's a way you can get stronger, or here's a way you can lose weight, and you don't actually have to, you can eat everything you want, or you don't actually have to train. Just do this for 5 minutes and you'll have everything you need, and you'll get much, much stronger. And it's all crap, right? I mean, it's all BS. And so a sort of approach that I like is to, no, you are going to deal with pain. You have pain in your life, and you should just accept that, and don't think that you can get by without accepting the amount of pain that's actually going to exist in your life. However, one thing you can engage in is what I call pain reallocation. Okay. So like say this piece of paper, let's suppose that this piece of paper, this volume represents all the pain in your life. Okay. But there's two different kinds of pain. And imagine that this volume is separated by a divider. And so let's say that on this side is the kind of pain that's associated with hard work, sacrifice, discipline, really, things that you normally know you should be doing, but maybe you're not doing. And then on this side is the sort of pain associated with dissatisfaction, not achieving your goals, failing in various ways, not being fulfilled. And so the way to think about this, I mean, this is just a geometric representation of something I think we all deep down know, is this divider is not going to reduce the overall amount of pain in your life, but you can engage in pain reallocation, where this kind of pain, which I think most people want less of, the pain associated with failure and not achieving your goals, can be reduced. You can move the divide over so that quantity of pain becomes much, much less. But the only way that's going to happen geometrically is if you substantially increase this amount of pain. And that means you have to work harder and have more discipline. So that's what the pain box is about. So there's this pain reallocation where you can swap out this kind of suffering for this kind of suffering, but that means there's more hard work involved. And then if you back off the hard work, of course, there'll be less suffering in that sense, and devotion and dedication, but then you're going to have a much greater volume of the kind of pain associated with not achieving your goals and dissatisfaction. So I kind of came up with that because what it does is it helps make very vivid the geometry of how I kind of live my life, basically, which is, it's a kind of way of putting no pain, no gain. And only it's like, I realized that, wow, I really do want to have more success and I really do want to achieve certain goals. But given this sort of geometric representation, I can see that there's a direct inverse relation between that and how much hard work I do. And so that's what kind of motivated me to come up with the pain box.
No pain, no gain, for sure. Anybody who's been in the game long enough can likely identify with that. I want to go back to the philosophy side for a second. I mean, Bill, you're a very thoughtful person. Is there a philosophical idea or framework that's helped you push through some of that, again, pain or failure? Or you talked about, I guess, stoicism for a second there. Is there something like that that's kind of helped you frame that and
I mean,
forward?
There's maybe my interpretation of stoicism, but whenever I talk to somebody who really knows stoicism, they're like, "Oh, no, that's way too much of an oversimplification," and that's kind of a pop philosophy perspective. I mean, I don't know. I do feel like there is a kind of ideological commitment that I have there that goes all the way back to when I was a little boy. And I know my father once told me this. I grew up on a cattle ranch, but the bottom line is that he's like, you need to accept that nothing comes easy. But if you work hard, it will come. And that's the difference, is working hard. And I think as a kid, I came to appreciate that I wasn't a really terribly good athlete. In most sports, it seems like other kids were better, just naturally gifted athletes. But I then came to appreciate that I did have a kind of gift where I could outperform other kids just by being tougher than them, frankly, and working harder and trying harder. And I could do that. That was the one thing I could do. Psychologically, I was tougher than them and I could work harder than they were. When I was in high school, we had this thing called the Marine Corps Physical Fitness Test. And it was pretty grueling. I mean, it was a lot of, you had to do 100 sit-ups in 2 minutes, and then you had to do 60 push-ups, and pull-ups were like 30, and you only had like a few minutes in between each event. And there was no coach or anything. So that's why I first started self-coaching. That's why I first started figuring out what kind of work I needed to do to actually do well in this. And it was kind of a place of pride in Madras High School, because we would always go up against the big Portland schools and we would always win. We were uniquely good at that. And so I took that quite seriously. And I think my senior year, I had the highest score in the country for that particular test. And that's when I first really came to appreciate that I like this process of self-coaching. And I also came to appreciate that, regardless of what your natural talents are, I mean, obviously at some level it makes a difference, but at this level, it can all be overcome by just hard work and sacrifice. And I think, what you see at the top level, at the very Olympic level, is you have people who understand that, but they also are naturally gifted. and so they get the whole package. But even as for rank amateurs, you can actually go pretty far by just toughing it out and working hard and sacrifice and having discipline. And so that's always been my kind of underlying perspective, my underlying philosophy.
No silver bullets to climbing 514 in your 60s. Well, for sure. Bill, thank you. Just a few final fun questions before we let you get on to evening. If you could gift every climber one mindset shift, what would that be? Let's say one aging climber.
I mean, the one thing that makes a difference for me is figuring out the dimension of climbing that regardless of your success, you just enjoy the process. And then focusing on that, just focus on the enjoyment of the process. Because even if you can't achieve your goals, well, that is a goal in a sense, is enjoying the time that you're doing this. And it's sort of like what you said about the younger climbers. I don't think they appreciate all the different dimensions of climbing. They don't appreciate always that this isn't going to last forever. And these venues and these people you're hanging out with are really special and something to be very grateful that you still get the opportunity to participate in this. So it's be grateful, even when it's a hard day and even when you're hurting and even when it's tough, it's still better than sitting home lying on the couch. And so be grateful that I feel like I've been incredibly lucky and that I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm kind of still a young man. I'm getting to be a young man for a really long time. And that is something that I'm extremely grateful for. It's not a day I'm at the cliff and I don't appreciate that here I am and I'm still climbing with some of the best climbers in the country and with these people that I'm old enough to be their grandfather, basically. And I'm still getting to play this game. I just can't believe that. It's just amazing. And so I think that's one thing that's really important is just, it's still going to be tough. You're going to be pushing hard. You're going to have some rough days. But overall, just appreciate and be grateful for the opportunity to still be doing this.
Yes, 100%. Every day out climbing is a gift.
Yeah.
What's a small habit that's had an outsized impact on your life in the last few years?
I think I'm pretty ritualistic about my climbing and my training and my day at the crag. I have the little rituals I go through. The first thing I do when I get to the cliff is I stretch, and I take up a pad that I stretch on because I feel like you usually just done a bit of a hike, so your muscles are warmed up in your legs. You should be stretching. That's what a real athlete does, is they stretch. Like watch any athlete during the day, they're stretching all throughout the entire day. People should be doing that. And that's kind of a habit, but it's also probably a little bit of an OCD expression that I have these sort of habitual rituals that I go through. But it also normalizes how the day goes, and it kind of gets me in the right mindset to do something. So I'd say that's a little bit of a hack that I have, is kind of being a little bit ritualistic. And you got to be willing to adapt. You got to be willing to change things. You got to be innovative. But it's also good to have a routine, and that routine gives you familiarity. And if you can make that routine a routine that is also going to help protect you and keep you safe from getting injured on hard moves, then I think that's a little bit of a hack that's actually quite beneficial.
I love having routines because they also provide me a sense of comfort and even gratification, that even if I did not achieve maybe some arbitrary goal out there, I managed to tick off these boxes that give me contentment. Bill,
I think one other thing I would say is that it's good to have every go I give on a project. It's like, okay, what's my agenda for this go? And I have agendas for the day where it's like, okay, I want to maybe try to get from here to here, but if that doesn't work out, then I'm going to have a plan B. I want to get this kind of a low point. If that doesn't work out, then I want to figure out this truck sequence in this way. And to sort of have a strategy going into the day for, what your goals are going to be for that particular day. And if one goal doesn't work out, then you have a backup goal that you're going to try to do. And so that also, I think, is beneficial. And then, I wrote out different different sorts of high points that I wanted to get. And then there's stage 1 low points and high points, and stage 2. And, you do it in terms of, wow, you're really starting to get close when you get into the stage 3 goals. You're basically right there, ready to ascend. But it's good to name all those goals and have them there, and you start checking them off as you're working on a long project. You can start seeing, it's starting to happen. It's starting to get it together. So I think all those little hacks also are quite beneficial.
Those hacks are so great, like not only to really quantify your progress, but also give us that, we as humans, we're hungry for success. So
Yeah.
I think that helps, take care of that as well.
Because this activity is soul crushing in many ways. You are failing a bunch. You're mostly failing when you're climbing these routes. So you have to redefine what success is, and success is always going to be getting this far on this day and getting through this section on this day. And you have to have these tons of mini goals so that you can accomplish the overall goal. And I think that's what makes it, that's going to make a day where you're not going to send a fun day, nonetheless, that you walk away from feeling really good about your performance.
Love it, Bill. What may be one? Yeah, let me rephrase that. What is the greatest gift you've given somebody in recent memory?
Oh my God. You get to a certain age and you seem like you're mentoring everybody. And I would say there's so many times when I'm with people who are a little bit younger, who are typically much stronger than me, much more talented than me. But, they maybe don't know all the tricks. For example, I was climbing with this kid yesterday who's trying to do a 515 right next to where I'm trying to climb 514. And he complained about going numb. So I told him, try this thing with the snow. And he did it. I mean, he didn't send, but he didn't go numb either. So those little life hacks and those little things that you've found over your climbing career, you can pass along. And, I'm a teacher at heart. I love teaching. I really enjoy it. I loved it almost as much as climbing. And so when I can combine my teaching with climbing and try to help people get better and help people actually achieve their goals and succeed on a climb, I mean, that's maybe a gift I give to them, but it's a great gift I give to myself because I feel great then when that happens.
And conversely, what may be the greatest gift you have received?
Oh my God. I mean, there's just so many, frankly. I think the very first time my dad took me climbing was an amazing gift, just introducing me to this whole activity. It's always a gift when I hear about somebody doing a route that I put up, something maybe at the Motherlode or something like that is a really, really, really good climber, like a top level. And they're like, this is an awesome climb. This is a neat climb. Thanks for doing that or something like that. That's a great feeling to have made that kind of a contribution. And I think we should be doing more of that. I know that, putting up a route is really a lot of hard work. It's expensive. And, I think a lot of kids think, well, this is just like somebody's hired to do this, like in the gym. No, this took a tremendous amount of time and energy and sacrifice and money. And when people put up routes, don't whine about it. Don't complain about it. Tell them how much you appreciate what they actually did, because of that kind of work, you're able to have this really good time. So I feel like those are the gifts that when I did this climb up at the Fossil Cave, I wrote something on Facebook about Randy and just how much work he put into and the industry that he put into developing places like the Fossil Cave and the third tier, Mount Clark and various other spots. And I've been climbing on his routes for 40 years and it's just all amazing and wonderful. And I just think about my debt to somebody like that. It's pretty incredible. So yeah, I feel like anybody who's out there putting up new routes, putting up things that we're going to play on, these toys that we're going to have a good time on, they're giving the entire climbing community these gifts, and we should really let them know we appreciate that.
Again, such a good insight and a reminder. And it's absolutely the people who are developing the climbs, but also people who do all the work to help protect access, who are doing 100%. All the stunt work with unsung heroes, building trails, making agreements with landowners, clearing way for the rest of us to be able to enjoy this wonderful sport. They are giving this gift to the rest of us.
Could not agree more. I 100% agree. I haven't been associated with the group, but there's a Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition here, and people should join their local climbers coalitions and give them money and give them love, because they are fighting those battles, and it's not easy. There's, a lot of times land managers it makes it easier just to not have climbers in the picture. So we should be doing what we can to support the Access Fund and all these different organizations that make it possible for us to do a 100% agree.
Super. And then, yeah, just final question. But you obviously love the access to climbing in Vegas. It is world class, 12 months a year, so many types of climbing. What's one other thing about Vegas that you love?
I love the fact that where I live, I can go 20 minutes in one direction and I'm in a pristine Mojave Desert, and you'd be one of the canyons in Red Rocks or maybe be at Mount Potosi, and you would never dream you're near a major metropolitan area. Then I can come home and go 20 minutes the opposite direction, and I'm in this insane urban Disneyland where you can go to these amazing shows and go to these amazing restaurants. And now we have all these sporting events. We have this cool thing called the Sphere. The contrast could not be greater. It's insane, the contrast. But I love that extreme ends of the spectrum that it offers. And I'm stuck right in between those two worlds. So that's one thing that I really think is cool about Vegas, is just the level of contrast between the Mojave Desert on the one hand and just how wild that can be and how primitive that can be. And then this crazy place called the Strip on the other hand, that you can ignore it if you want, I mean, you don't have to hang out there, but if you have friends visiting, it's kind of neat to go down there and check out what's going on. So it's the contrast that I really love.
Absolutely. Yes. That contrast does not get old. Bill, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really, really enjoyable. This has been really fun. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more of your podcasts as well. I really appreciate that you're doing this. I think it's a really important area to hear what some of the older athletes are up to and how they're functioning. So thank you for your podcast.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Ageless Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review, crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter their age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup, Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless.
Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through Brad episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week.
And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.